I'm Kim Wilcox. I'm the Chancellor here at the University of California, Riverside. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Chancellor's Distinguished Lecture. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Think about things that need changing, the stop sign at the end of the street, all the small things, but think also of the bigger things. The IRS tax system, inequality in the world. Simply complaining about that doesn't get you very far. But offering a new frame, offering a new model, one that is so obviously better and does in fact make the existing model obsolete, starts to affect change. We're very grateful to have here today someone who has thought about perhaps one of the nation's and the world's most vexing problems, racial and social inequality, and hasn't just thought about it and complained about it, but helped create a whole new frame for thinking about it and challenging and working to do something to improve the situation in the very best traditions of our university and I believe of our nation. It's a case where one individual has succeeded in bringing the best of academic traditions to the most important of social issues in America today. And in a day like today, on a campus as beautiful as ours, it's important that we remember part of our own tradition in good and bad race relations, and the fact that, of course, we're on land that didn't belong to us originally, belonged to Native peoples of the Cahuilla, Serrano, Lasenia, Chemehuevi, and Tongva peoples, and how we have now taken that to our purpose. And it's part of the reframing that our professor today has helped us think about, how to look at the issues of today through the lens of not just today and yesterday, but the lens of tomorrow. And we're particularly fortunate to have not just one Latin sociology expert on our campus and on the platform today, but two. Milagros Peña, or Millie, is our Dean of the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. She's also a sociologist who works in Latinx issues and race issues. And it's my extreme pleasure to introduce to you Millie Peña, who will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Chancellor Wilcox. And let me add my greetings to Chancellor Wilcox and welcome you all here today for this time with Dr. Eduardo Bonilla-Silva. I would like to thank, first of all, many of the co-sponsors that made today's event possible. Let me start with thanking the UCR Department of Sociology, as well as the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, Distinguished Professor of Public Policy and Sociology, Professor Bruce Link. Also the Department of Social Medicine, Population, and Public Health, Department of Psychology, the Department of Ethnic Studies, Latin American Studies Program, Chicano Students Programs, the Asian Pacific Student Programs, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Young-O Kim Center for Korean American Studies at UCR, and also the Associated Students at UCR. We're all grateful for these groups and so many others across campus who work hard to foster an inclusive environment. We are also pleased to have such a great interest from all of you today in today's event, and we hope it inspires good questions and conversations beyond the lecture. And to start that process, I want you to feel free to write down any questions that you have that are sparked during the lecture and that you might like to have our speaker address. You can write your questions on one of the note cards you were given when you came in today. And at the conclusion of the lecture portion, you may pass the cards down the aisle to your left so that they can be collected along that aisle. So feel free to write down your questions as Dr. Bonilla-Silva is speaking. So I have the real privilege today to be able to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Eduardo Bonilla-Silva. Dr. Bonilla-Silva is the James B. Duke Professor of Sociology at Duke University. He gained visibility in the social sciences with his 1997 American Sociological Review article, Rethinking Racism Toward a Structural Interpretation, where he challenged analysts to study racial matters structurally rather than from the sterile prejudice perspective. His book, Racism Without Racists, is now in its 5th edition as of 2017 and has become a classic in the field, influencing scholars in education, religious studies, political science, rhetoric, psychology, political science, legal studies, and sociology. It also won the Choice Award in 2004 and again in 2015. In addition to this groundbreaking work, he's also published White Supremacy and Racism in Post-Civil Rights Era. It was a co-winner of the 2002 Oliver Cox Award given by the American Sociological Association. In 2003, he published Whiteout, The Continuing Significance of Racism with Ashley Duane. In 2008, he published White Logic, White Methods, Racism and Methodology with Zukufu Zuberi, and also it was a co-winner of the 2009 Oliver Cox Award. And in 2011, he published State of White Supremacy, Racism, Governance in the United States with Moon Kai-jung and João Costa Vargas. His research has appeared in numerous journals, so many to mention, but really across the spectrum and in the top journals of sociology. Dr. Bonilla-Silva has received many awards, most notably in 2007, the Louis Kozer Award given by the Theory Section of the American Sociological Association for theoretical agenda setting, and in 2011, the Cox Johnson Fraser Award given by the American Sociological Association to an individual or individuals for their work in the intellectual traditions of the work of these 3 African American scholars. He served as president of the Southern Sociological Association and the American Sociological Association in the same year, 2017-2018. And prior to his current role at Duke University, Dr. Bonilla-Silva worked at Texas A&M University from 98 to 2005, and he was also on the faculty at the University of Michigan from 93 to 98. Dr. Bonilla-Silva was born in Belafonte, Pennsylvania, but moved to Puerto Rico when he was a toddler. As a student in Puerto Rico, he was influenced by professors such as Arturo Torresillas, Juan José Baldrich, Miriam Muñiz, and the late Carlos Buitrago. He also worked at a camp for children with special needs before college at the University of Puerto Rico, and this influenced much of his sociological outlook. Dr. Bonilla-Silva moved back to the US in 1984 for graduate school, and he received his MA and PhD in sociology from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Eduardo Bonilla-Silva.
I always wonder why people clap before listening to a presentation. Maybe you want to take that back when I finish. So. And some of you see there is a stool here. I am not going to do a Clint Eastwood, okay? This is because I suffer from sciatica, so in the middle of the presentation, I may need to, get some support. Feeling race. This is a very strange subject for a talk from a scholar like me, known in the field for my writings on racial theory, whiteness, race and methodology, the Latin Americanization of race stratification in the US, racial grammar, colorblind racism, and many other things, but not for work on emotions. The subject of choice is curiouser and curiouser, as Alice in Wonderland would put it, given that I have argued that racism is a materially driven social feature. Hence, let me begin by explaining why I am interested in racialized emotions. Racialized emotions affected me even before I knew what race was, and well before I recognized myself as a beautiful black Puerto Rican. Okay, the beautiful is extra. Thank you. This is so because, as James Baldwin declared in The Fire Next Time, Long before the Negro child perceives this difference, socially imposed white superiority, and even longer before he understands it, he has begun to react to it. He has begun to be controlled by it. I've continued feeling race throughout my life, both in Puerto Rico as well as in the US. However, my interest in racialized emotions is not part of a personal trip, as whether consciously or not, we all feel race. And we all feel race because, like class and gender, race is manufactured not just objectively, but subjectively. That is, race is also an affective formation. To be clear, I still firmly believe that race matters cannot be properly analyzed without a structural anchoring. I still believe it is imperative we uncover the social practices and mechanisms responsible for the production of racial domination, rather than focus, as many of us do, on examining the attitudes of individuals. And I still hold that racial affairs have a material aspect to them. That is, that whites fight in various ways to defend their privileged social position, and that we, the wretched of the earth, to use Fanon's term, fight to improve our lot. Nevertheless, I no longer assume racial domination is just a matter of objective practices reflecting the socioeconomic material interests of racial actors. Once the world was racialized, about 500 years ago, a racialization that is ongoing, yeah? Race doesn't exist, it's continually being produced and reproduced. Racialized emotions glued, cemented our lives. Most whites came to believe and feel what religious scholar Nelson Maldonado Torres aptly calls the enchantment of whiteness, the cognitive and emotional translation of the belief in white superiority, an enchantment experienced and felt by people of color as domination. The invention of race as a category was infused with emotions, and it could not have been otherwise. How could it not have been so when 90% of humanity was depicted as cannibals, as Indians were during the conquest of America, or as sex-obsessed and stupid, as Thomas Jefferson described blacks in his Notes on Virginia, or as carriers of large-scale crime and disease, as President Trump recently labeled immigrants from Central America. In this construction of the other, whites created themselves too. But as a race of intelligent, beautiful, moral subjects in charge of civilizing the world. The great Du Bois pondered sarcastically in his essay, The Souls of White Folks, about, and I quote, the effect on a man or a nation when it comes passionately to believe such an extraordinary dictum. Not surprisingly, racial groups have developed appropriate emotions that, for the most part, match their location in the racial totem pole. Whites' emotions tend to reproduce the racial status quo, whereas those of non-whites challenge it. Accordingly, the eradication of racism will require both a concerted political effort to eliminate its visible practices, as well as an effective politics of emancipation. Today I will present to you a brief theoretical sketch of how to conceive racialized emotions, focusing both on their systemic character as well as on variance on the emotive subjects. The latter, I will show variance, is crucial for thinking about how to change the racial world in which we live. If there is no variance, hard for us to think about a better future, yeah? After the sketch, I will hint at potential avenues of work and end with a provocative yet short comment about racialized emotions in the academy. Ooh. Before you say it, I'm going to. Okay. So let me define my terms. First, I'm theorizing racialized emotions and not so-called universal emotions, as I am not interested in people's fear of snakes or spiders, but rather the social emotions that emerge in specific racialized societies. It's important because if they are social products, we can change them, yeah? If they are universal things, then they're sort of fixed. Second, I do not separate feelings, the cognitive translation of body states, and emotions, body states in response to external stimuli, because the field of emotions has largely moved past the Cartesian modern dualism between rationality and so-called irrationality. The cognitive and the emotional, we now realize, work in tandem. So let me begin. Most whites fear people of color in interracial encounters, and many people of color experience anxiety and discomfort in white-dominated environments. Yep. Gracias. On white fear, I cite Rebecca McCrae, a social justice writer who reflected on her own racialized fears in a piece dealing with the McKinney, Texas pool incident in 2015. While it is my job to think and report deeply on race and justice in my waking life, by the way, I'm a white woman from a predominantly white Midwestern city, I have also instinctively and unthinkingly clutched at my purse while crossing paths with a black man on a dark street, then felt disgust at my actions. I have locked my doors while driving through the south side of Chicago. McCrae's fears is part of a collective phenomenon, as racialized emotions are not free-floating substances in the interior of individuals, but group-based and relational. Their group-based nature reflects the different positions of actors in the racial orders, as, paraphrasing Marx, we are not just individuals who happen to be a citizen or a slave. The relational component of racialized emotions is the product of race-making, a continuous, never-finished process with a peculiar dialectic. Whiteness, for example, cannot operate in isolation because, as Kimberly Crenshaw argues, racial domination necessitates, and I quote her, oppositional categories in a hierarchical order. You cannot create a group and say, well, these are the fifis, and everybody's a fifi, because it doesn't work. You have to have different groups and assign a position of superiority to one and inferiority to another. Blackness is also relational because, as Fanon stated, for not only must the black man be, that's the language of 50 years, 60 years ago, for not only the black man must be black, he must be black in relation to the white man. But does this mean that we are condemned to feel race in a particular way because of our racial ascription? Albeit we all are social subjects, each person has a unique history of engagements in various sets of relations, which partly accounts for the racial individuality. Within groups, there is also variance in the experience of racialized emotions. Consequently, although we can predict in general the emotional responses of individuals based on their racial location, deviance and variance occur. Think about John Brown, white man willing to die for the cause, or think about Clarence Thomas. Variance also works within folks of color. For example, Jason, a white college student participating in a study exploring white students' experiences taking multicultural studies courses, challenged his grandfather's belief in the rumor that Michelle Obama's college thesis was titled, How to Kill Whiteys, Volume 1. This led him to be shunned by his family. I mean, I call home once a week, check on how my siblings and such are doing, and I called. They were very curt. They said they were busy. I have a pretty extended family, and we all do keep in touch, and so at first I just thought I was hearing some bad schedules. But then, as it became more and more consistent, I finally realized that I'm in the racial doghouse for daring to defend a black person. Nevertheless, and throughout the talk I'll emphasize variance. So despite variance, the racial order is typically reproduced because individuals are constrained by social relations, group belonging, and emotional group norms. How to break White's emotional cycle is part of the practical thinking we desperately need for changing the world race has made. And I don't have the solution to that, so that's for you younger folks. Modern subjects, as Althusser argued, are interpolated as individuals, but they're also interpolated as gendered and racialized actors. Our racial subjectivity is shaped by racial projects of freedom for some and of slavery, land theft, labor exploitation, and genocide for others. As racial subjects, we experience, learn, and live racialized relationships, not just objectively, but subjectively or emotionally. Therefore, our racial subjectivities are neither innocent nor symmetrical and express and reflect power differentials. Again, in Fanon's words, the white man is not just the other, but also the master, whether real or imaginary. The social relations that produce whiteness, for example, are also emotionally charged and create identity. As political psychologist Jonathan Mercer observes, the social emotion of group identity cannot be reduced to biological bodies. Instead, emotion goes with identity. Group-level emotion can be stronger than and different from emotion experienced as an individual. Group members share, validate, and police each other's feelings. And these feelings structure relations within and between groups. Nevertheless, as these subjectivities are not uniforms to be sported in school, there are variations in how individuals express and perform their identities. As Asante, Sakimoto, and Brown state about blackness, an observation that applies to all racial subjectivities, there is no authentic or universal black, they're talking about blacks, that applies to Latinos, whites, Asians, etc. So there is no universal or authentic black experience, but the shades of blackness fluctuate based on locally specific racial politics, history of white supremacy, and inter-ethnic relations among blacks. Furthermore, even though the affective force of our racial subjectivity is never fully outside us, we always internalize it. Even those of us who think of ourselves as racially progressive, this is internalized, yeah? Our subjectivity can be changed through upheavals, encounters, and other means. Important that to think about how we can change these emotional, racialized emotions, yeah? These changes, unfortunately, can go in all directions, yeah? For example, Miguel, a second-generation Latino working as a Border Patrol agent, is an example of an anti-Latino Latino. Do we have that? Hello? And evinces a Trump-like mano dura stance on immigrants. These are criminal people. It could be Trump talking. These are criminal people. I mean, some of these people coming across, you have to be able to control that. The way you know about that is getting them in the station and rolling their fingerprints. People say, you know, that law is not right. You know, it's not morally right. I'm like, no, no, no. It has nothing to do with moral issues. I'm talking about criminal aliens trying to get into, it's like, you're going to stop people coming into your house, right? You peek in and see, do I know this person coming into my home? Who are you? Someone knocks against admittance, you are going to say, hey, who are you? Are you a salesman or what are you? but you're going to find out who this person is. You're not going to just let him in. Just let him into your home. So why are you going to let him come into the U.S. as a government, as a sovereign nation? The U.S. has got to be able to do that. There is only one way of doing that. We all feel race, but our feelings are not equally validated in the emotional public square. A structure of feelings is in place which gives preeminence to the emotions of the racially dominant group, creating what education philosopher Megan Bowler refers to as feeling power, the power dynamic involved in emotional transactions. For example, feminists of color such as Gloria Anzaldúa, Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, and others have written about how the tears of white women are almost magical and command concern. Oh, poor white woman. Whereas the emotions of people of color are quite often seen as suspect or do not command the seriousness they should. This explains why most whites cannot relate to the raw feelings expressed by Linda Chavers in Dame magazine after Officer Darren Wilson was not indicted for killing Mike Brown a few years ago. I warn you, in the quote there is some language, but emotions, language, etc. go together. I'll try to clean it up, but it is what it is. It is now a week since Darrell Wilson was not indicted by a grand jury for shooting and killing Michael Brown. A week since he testified that he felt as if Brown was an it, a demon that would not die. A colleague tells me she and her husband are taking their one-year-old son apple picking. An old high school friend posts pictures of a warm, wholesome Thanksgiving dinner. I want to scream, F your apples, F your turkey, F your holidays, F your smiles, F you, F your children. How can I do anything? How can anyone do anything remotely normal like mother effing apple picking? Pause. I feel race. So I remember when in my own campus there was a noose hanging from a tree, and how after a brief how can that happen at Duke? Hello? Campus returned to normal, people playing frisbee, etc. And it took many of us, faculty and students of color, a good 3, 4, 5 days to sort of return to so-called normality. Yeah? Yet, in keeping with my discussion on variance, emotions are not completely functional. Racialized emotions are imperfect social products, like all social products are. Yeah? Transacted in social interactions, producing at times unexpected outcomes. Hence, although most whites continued life as usual, stuffing themselves with turkey or picking apples after Officer Wilson was not indicted, some did not, much like they did not after the murder of Emmett Till in 1955. Now we have historians talking about the Emmett Till white generation of progressive folks in America. Yeah? A good recent example of this variance is Seahawks center Justin Britt, who put an arm around defensive end Michael Bennett during Bennett's protest of the national anthem a few years ago. After the game, Britt stated the following: I want to support him. I want to support what he stands for and his beliefs. I'm not foolish, I'm from Missouri. I get that things are different in that area than they are in some other areas. I'm not against what the flag means and veterans. My dad was in the Army, so I'm not putting any disrespect to them. I'm just trying to understand the issues, trying to educate myself more in that regard and showing support. And I'm going to continue to understand what's going on in the world and why it's happening, because none of it is right. None of it's what should be happening. I'm going to continue talking with Mike and exploring and just helping myself understand things. I wanted to take a first step tonight, and that's what I felt like I did. In a follow-up interview, he added, Mike said it was an emotional moment for him, but it was for me too. It wasn't easy. I felt anxious, But I felt the power of positivity coming through me, through him. It was a unique moment in my life. It's something I hope has meaning. So racialized emotions are rational, and I put that in quotation mark. Yeah? But the rationality must be understood from the concrete, historically produced position of racial groups, and not from a narrow, economistic view. For instance, whites' fear of blacks, negrophobia, and Muslims, Islamophobia, is based on demonstrably false facts. However, whites' fear of people of color and foreigners derives its tremendous power from a race-based, historically shaped emotional rationality. Whites' emotional rationality explains why working-class whites support Trump. Even though his policies, tax cuts, deregulation, etc., ultimately benefit capitalists, rich folks, yeah, making it seem like the white masses are duped, from an affective logic angle, they are not, given that whites' identities are fundamentally built on notions of freedom and being self-made and hardworking people, in opposition to racial others, whom they regard as lazy and undeserving. Their support for Trump makes emotional sense. They love Trump not just because he promised them a few tangible material things, yeah? So he said he was going to bring jobs back in the coal industry, for instance, and as you know, that's not going to happen. He said he was going to tax the wealthy, and as you know, that's not what he did. So they love him because he says he's going to build a wall, which is translated as controlling undocumented workers. He says he's going to deal with crime in cities such as Chicago, code language to signify to the white masses, I'm going to control black folks, yeah? He says that he's going to ban Muslims from coming to America, presenting America as a Christian white nation, yeah? And he said, it's a quote, it's not me, this is Trump. He said he was going to bomb the shit out of ISIS, yeah? So control the order outside America. In short, Trump connects with the white masses by satisfying them emotionally. But I have to add a very important caveat, even though it may seem contradictory. So let's see if this works. The foundation for whites' racialized emotions is faulty and self-serving. Their pains are not caused by blacks, Muslims, or undocumented workers. However, although the foundation for the racialized emotions is mostly baseless, their emotions are real in their consequences and have a materiality that cannot be ignored or assumed unchangeable. Fleshing out a politics that appreciates the emotional force behind white racialized emotions, as well as the fact that they're ultimately rooted on nothing, will be central for changing the racial world, particularly in Trump America. Social analysts have mostly focused their attention on negative emotions. So those sociologists, psychologists in the group studying race stuff know that we have put a lot of effort analyzing anger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, racial actors display and experience the full range of human emotions. For example, without happiness and solidarity, black people all over the world would not have survived the nightmare of slavery. Enslaved Africans were never socially dead, as some sociologists have claimed, and created necessary spaces to maintain their humanity at home and even in illicit parties. On the latter, ex-slave Austin Stewart wrote in his autobiography, every dusky face was lighted up, and every eye sparkled with joy. However ill-fed they might have been, here, for once, there was plenty. Suffering and toil was forgotten, and they all seemed with one accord to give themselves up to the intoxication of pleasurable amusement. Historian Stephanie Camp underscores the importance of these experiences. In the context of enslavement, such exhilarating pleasure gotten by illicit use of the body must be understood as important and meaningful enjoyment, as personal expression, and as oppositional engagement of the body. Now let me get into hot water. Another emotion that is seldom discussed is pleasure in domination. And of course, there is pleasure in resistance. Some of you are familiar with this picture, yeah? These folks are about to get their faces smashed by the police, but they have achieved what social movements call cognitive liberation. I want to call that not only cognitive, but also emotional liberation. Yeah? These people are willing to be smacked, some of them to be killed, but they have reached the point of, whatever you do, I cannot continue in this state of affairs. Yeah? The pictures of lynching parties with whites literally posing, proudly and happily, are testimonies of what legal scholar Neil Gotonda calls illicit racial pleasures. Lynchings, in fact, were often public, well-attended, festive, family events. They had like a picnic, yeah? Pictures were taken, food was served, and souvenirs were sold. People thought about taking pieces of the ropes used for lynching, yeah? Some of the souvenirs, this is the cruelty that race can produce, were even extracted from the bodies of the victims. I got a finger. A more contemporary case was the sodomization of Abner Luima by New York police officers in 1997. Paula Ionite describes the horrific incident in her important book, The Emotional Politics of Racism. Officer Justin Volpe inserted, and I quote, again, tough language, inserted a broken broomstick approximately 6 inches of Luima's rectum and extracted it covered with blood and feces. Volpe performed this brutal act in full view of his squad, while Luima kept screaming, "Why? Why?" Volpe justified this action to Luima in straight racist fashion. You niggers have to learn to respect police officers. Afterwards, he proudly told his fellow officers, "I broke a man down. I took a man down tonight." Let me get off the transcript. The complexity of race. Officer Volpe was dating a black woman. This delight in domination is also displayed by many Trump supporters who rejoice with every insult, put down, taunt, and threat of violence he makes. In June 2018, Esteban Guzman, a 27-year-old Mexican-American from California, was insulted by a Trumpista woman. There is a video online, those of you who want to check it. The video shows the white woman telling Guzman's mother, "Go back to Mexico." Guzman intervenes and asks her, "Why do you hate us?" To which she answers, "Because you're Mexicans." Guzman replies, "We're honest people." And the woman, using language reminiscent of Trump, said, "Yeah, rapists, drug dealers, rapists, and animals." But I must make a point here, even if it angers some of you. It's not my intent, but I want to cover my arguments, yeah? So-called racist whites are not the only whites who derive pleasure from racial domination. Because all whites, whether consciously or not, participate in various ways and degrees in maintaining racial order. They derive a degree of satisfaction in enforcing racial boundaries and whatever the racial etiquette of the day is. This is, as Nietzsche would say, beyond good and evil. When a system is in place, the emotions sort of follow. Please watch the video of the 2015 McKinney, Texas pool party incident. and observed both how most regular white folks, and they're highlighted, they should have been highlighted in the pictures, but they're not, acted as deputized agents of racial control, as well as the deviance of Brandon Brooks, the white teenager who shot the video risking being shown by the white community at large. What he did was risky, yeah? Watch the multiple videos that have garnered media attention in the last few years, such as the lawyer who berated employees and customers for the crime of speaking Spanish in a New York restaurant. Tremenda cosa, huh? Hello, that was a joke. Oh, you're a tough boy. Okay. The racially overzealous Starbucks employees in Philadelphia and Los Angeles who denied blacks access to bathrooms, and the white woman who called the police on a group of blacks in Oakland for the crime of barbecuing while black, or on an 8-year-old black girl in San Francisco for selling water without a permit. None of the whites involved in these incidents belong to the Klan or to the alt-right, although the fellow that in New York has a history of doing similar things, yeah? So the implication of this is that regular white folks can participate in acts of racial discipline and derive pleasure, or at least, let's call it satisfaction, from doing so. In the paper version of this talk, I make the argument a bit more complex by acknowledging that emotional experiences can be somewhat contradictory and ambivalent. So you can derive pleasure and at the same time be anxious, yeah? You can be participating in lynching and be like, yeah, and then, yeah? So, following the important work of Sarah Ahmed on emotions, I contend that racialized emotions are material and do things. Emotions move, circulate, and help produce identities and transform signs. Take, for instance, Audre Lorde's experience as a child after she realized a white woman did not want to sit by her in the subway, something that happened to me many, many times in buses. You can do analysis of the logical place for this white person to sit is by me, but this person prefers to go to the other car. Have you done that? Yeah. Okay. The AA subway train to Harlem. I clutched my mother's sleeve, her arms full of shopping bags, Christmas heavy, the wet smell of winter clothes, the train's lurching. My mother spots an almost empty seat, pushes my little snow-suited body down. On one side of me, a man reading a paper. On the other, a woman in a fur hat staring at me. Her mouth twitches as she stares, and then her gaze drops down, pulling mine with it. Her leather-gloved hand plucks at the line where my new blue snow pants and her sleek fur coat meet. She jerks her coat close to her. I look. I do not see whatever terrible thing she is seeing on the seat between us, probably a roach. But she has communicated her horror to me. It must be something very bad from the way she's looking. So I pull my snowsuit closer to me, away from me too. When I look up, the woman is still staring at me. Her nose, holes, and eyes huge. Suddenly, I realize there is nothing crawling up the seat between us. It is me she doesn't want her coat to touch. The fur brushes my face as she stands with a shudder and holds onto a strap in the speeding train. Born and bred in a New York child, I quickly slide over to make room for my mother to sit down. No word has been spoken. I'm afraid to say anything to my mother because I don't know what I have done. I look at the side of my snow pants secretly. Is there something on them? Something going on here I do not understand. But I will never forget her eyes, the flared nostrils, the hate. Lorde describes an emotion here she classifies as hate, most likely is disgust, that traveled from the white woman to Lorde's body, creating what Amit and Stacy calls the skin becoming a border that fills. Lorde metabolized the emotion into shame as a child, and as she grew up and rethought the incident, then the emotion became anger. Her story is strikingly similar to Fanon's in Black Skin, White Mask. After hearing a white boy saying to her mother, "Look, a Negro," and "Mama, see the Negro, I am frightened," Fanon writes, "My body was returned to me spread-eagled, disjointed, redone, draped in mourning on this white winter's day. The Negro is an animal. The Negro is bad. The Negro is wicked. The Negro is ugly. Look, a Negro." Something like that happened to me in Wisconsin 30 years ago. And it was a bad day for me, so rather than allowing the white kid to have his day, I confess. When the kid was pushing me to give him a seat, I told him, "Get out! Mommy, black man is here." I was ready. That day he got. So the mother looked at me and said, "Okay, let's go. Quickly, quickly." Lord's and Fanon's experiences are not sui generis. Most likely every person of color here can attest to have experienced things like this, not just in the mean streets of America, but also in the sacred halls of the academy. I often ponder why is that so many of my scholars sort of recognize me when I'm in Duke. But when I'm just out of the campus, I become a regular black ontology with a beautiful Latino accent. And then I become invisible man. Then, no recognition. Why is that? A lot of our analysis of emotions frame them as discrete, independent experiences to be coded as 0 or 1, angry, happy, this or that. But recent work, both theoretically and empirically, some of it by biologists, has shown that emotions are not stable and are best seen as amorphous states that surface in what sociologists Bensky and Langman call emotional constellations. For instance, hating the other simultaneously produces love for same. And the fear generated by racially based moral panics, Trump demonizing Muslims, immigrants, and black folks, also creates the pleasure of surveillance. Zimmerman case comes to mind. Of course, some of you, but he's Latino. Yeah, he's an honorary white. Yeah, he played the honorary white card during the incident years ago. Yeah. Emotional ambivalence, however, is quite significant as it creates a level of indeterminacy vital for introspection and the possibility of change. Education scholar Tim Lensmar, in his important book, White Folks, cites Erin, a white woman who admits having different embodied responses based on the race of the customers at the clinic she works. Racism is the first hair on the back of your neck stands up, 20-year-old black male, not the 20-year-old white male. I thought, you do it. That's where that profiling comes from. I think we deal with that subconsciously every day. I recognize it. Sometimes I don't recognize it. I'm just appalled sometimes what the staff at the clinic will say. You are doing this for that? I wouldn't give them the time of day. So I see myself as being more tuned in, and I was just sort of appalled to think that, I really do have a certain amount of that going on. So Erin's ambivalence allows her to realize not only how her peers react to blacks, but also how she experiences the same emotions. However, since emotional ambivalence does not guarantee it will be resolved or the direction of the outcome, it can lead to behavior that is progressive, but it can also lead to behavior that is reactionary, even among members of the subordinated racial groups. So for instance, Rakesh, an Indian CEO of an investment company in India, recognized the preferential treatment whites receive in his line of work and stated that, and I quote him, they still not got over this colonialism. So he's talking about wealth system history, colonial domination, etc. At the same time, he said that he hired a white woman as his head of sales and justified his decision as follows. If I felt so bad, I should not have appointed Patricia. I went with the winning formula because it was my company. I had to protect the interests of my company. It's greater than me. So I never felt bad for it. I was, in fact, happy. So what is to be done? Our goal is to develop an effective politics based on what legal scholar Janine Young Kim labels as a feeling of equality. But for a feeling of equality to materialize, we should consider the following four things, and I will be brief. First, we must craft policies and a politics to de-racialize our subjectivity. In the case of whites, the marginal whiteness experienced by the white masses and the fact that subjectivity is multivocal, we're not just racial actors, we're also gender, class, etc., provides opportunities for political intervention. But as I'm talking to an audience populated by mostly white middle-class whites, I want to let you know that you are not beyond race, and that your racial subjectivity and its accompanying racialized emotions will need work too. In fact, many scholars believe your whiteness is hegemonic, making it harder to deconstruct than that of your poorer brethren. So don't believe the hype and be self-critical. In this moment, particularly in American history, where it's so easy to say, can you believe those whites supporting Trump? I'm so ashamed of them. I voted for Obama twice, and I would vote 3, 4, 5, 6 times for him. I'm so beyond. I'm post-post, yeah? Second, we must engage in the politics of recognition. We must recognize that the racial injustices, past and present, here and elsewhere, that made possible the U.S. standing in the world system. Slavery, genocide, colonialism, and the racialized exploitation of many workers are fundamental to our history. The policy of recognition, however, will not be primarily the result of rational argumentation and debate, as modernity's episteme is imperial and white-centered. Instead, it will be based on the experiences accumulated from race-based and anti-colonial movements of the South, forcing the acknowledgement of culpability and the enactment of policies to eliminate racial injustice. I'm not saying that rational discourse is irrelevant, but rationality is also compromise. Yeah? Rationality used to say that we're stupid, inferior. So I'm sorry, but the research shows that your IQ is 10 points lower. Yeah? Third, we must fold our efforts within the paradigm of racial justice. But racial justice, to be clear, is not simple diversity, as adding a few people of color to organizations, colleges, etc., does not lead to substantive change. Racial justice, as Robert Gooding Williams argues, is based on targeting the economic motives, entrenched habits, and unconscious urges that sustain racial domination, and requires, this is a crucial point, ethical or normative politics. Central to imagining racial justice involves acknowledging, rather than ignoring, that whites' racialized emotions are, as Cheryl Matthias notes in her Feeling White, very important book, by the way, characterized by guilt, defensiveness, anger, guilt, sadness, shame, and or anxiety. Thankfully, as I have been arguing throughout this talk, whites are not emotional robots. That's my version of a robot. Which makes some of them potential candidates for alliance. So there is political work, the possibility for us to change some folks. Lastly, we must explore anger, empathy, and love. Without anger, the oppressed cannot mobilize into action. Without empathy, whites cannot develop mutuality and respect towards racial others. And without love infused with justice, as Martin Luther King articulated so well just before he was assassinated, actually in his last writing, we cannot change the world while maintaining our humanity in the same process. I can say much more about what I think we may be considered to do to develop this program, but I must end by bringing my discussion home and addressing racialized emotions of scholars of color in historically white colleges and universities. Some of them may be now labeled Hispanic serving institutions, which is not enough. Demographic reality is important, but it's not all. You have to check your cultural traditions, your symbols, your curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Put your seatbelts. As a senior scholar of color, I hear from scholars of color all the time. I also hear from students, graduate and undergraduate, about racial issues in their institutions. They tell me how white colleagues disrespect them by referring to their work as research rather than research. Has happened to me. They tell me how they are lambasted for using the notion of racism in their work because, as I was told 20-some years ago, racism has no theoretical standing. I'm like, that's right, except that I get killed because of that. They tell me how their accolades are treated as secondary, while those garnered by their white colleagues, even if small, are viewed as earth-shattering. You publish an article in the local newsletter? Wow. Hey, keep it together. Accordingly, I'm saddened to report that most scholars of color suffer from what education scholar Will Smith has labeled as racial battle fatigue. Like Fannie Lou Hamer, most are sick and tired of being sick and tired. The race stuff can literally kill you. That's why we need to also develop a practice of self-help, and from time to time talk to our friend Dr. Johnny Walker Black. In my ASA presidential address, which now is out online in the American Sociology Review Journal, I discussed 4 of the central practices that contribute to the emotional state of scholars of color, namely inclusive exclusion, how scholars of color are citizens in the departments, but are not taken seriously or feel emotionally embedded. We are there, but we're not, yeah? Family matters, how race structures social relations and academic life in a way that makes whites comfortable and scholars of color uncomfortable. Race can become like kinship, yeah? Third, labeling, how scholars of color are labeled as problematic, difficult, or political. This is interesting to me because I have heard this not only of radical progressive scholars. I have heard this from people that I'm like, are you talking like that about this big scholar that you like? Wow, if they talk like that about this person, what do you think they say about me? Wow. Okay, Johnny Walker, let's talk. And lastly, racial assaults, how scholars of color endure macro and microaggressions from white faculty, graduate students, and undergraduate students, and from staff. We have plenty of empirical evidence on all these practices. But I know some whites in this audience, like in the nation at large, believe we exaggerate the import of race. Or worse, believe that the racial problems in the academy or in the nation are created by scholars of color. You guys are hypersensitive. I mean, we had a black president. What else you want? Equality? No compromise on that. But defensiveness, projection, or what sociologist Tyrone Foreman calls racial apathy, will not help us address our serious racial problems. It is time for white liberals to take off their colorblind eyeglasses. It is time for all of you to stop saying, I'm a good person. So this race stuff has nothing to do with me. We all participate. I didn't invent the game. I don't want to participate as a victim of the game. Yeah? But we all participate in various ways. So own that reality and then work to undo it. Yeah? It is time for you to do what you seldom do. Listen to scholars of color for real. Ask us how we feel in our departments. Ask us if we feel validated and respected. And if you have these conversations with an open heart, and guarantee no reprisals, you will be surprised, perhaps hurt by what you hear. But like in therapy, admitting one's issues is the first step for recovery, and I want everybody to recover from this racial nightmare we have been dealing with for 500 years. Accordingly, the burning question for us at this, let's be honest, very strange moment in America's racial history is this. Are we willing to work to transform the academy and make it truly inclusive, democratic, and multicultural? Or will we continue believing like Pangloss that ours is the best of all possible worlds? I sincerely hope we choose door number one, because as James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Thank you. Gracias.